Welcome to another audit walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over Audit Area 2, this is Section C3, this is an application topic. Perform a walkthrough of a significant business process and document, such as flowcharts, process diagrams, narratives, that would be the type of documentation. The flow of relevant transactions and data from initiation through financial statement reporting and disclosure. And we're going to be doing that the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. The link right here, by the way, takes you straight there. And you will learn in that 1 hour the 6 key ingredients to passing the CPA exam so that you don't waste months or even years of your time struggling with these exams. So make sure you check that out. And after you watch that, you're going to want to learn more. So make sure you also check out becoming a SuperfastCPA Pro member. SuperfastCPA Pro members get access to a lot of great stuff. They get access to the Pro course where Nate explains in depth exactly what you're supposed to be doing every single day. It's basically a much more in-depth and expanded version of the 1-hour webinar. And SuperfastCPA Pro members get access to the full 10-question videos instead of these 5-question YouTube videos. So just to make sure that's clear, in today's video, we're only going to be going over 5 questions, but if you become a SuperfastCPA Pro member, you will get access to the full 10-question video that is posted in the members forum. So if you like this and you like our other videos, if you become a Pro member, remember you can get access to the full 10-question videos to get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding. Now with all that, let's dive straight into the questions. All right, here we are at question 1. Let's just dive straight in. Which of the following best describes a walkthrough in an audit? So let's walk through the options. Option A, a high-level discussion with management about how financial data is summarized in the financial statements. Option B, a process in which the auditor traces a transaction from initiation through the entity's financial reporting using inquiry, observation, and inspection. Option C, a detailed test of internal controls to determine their operating effectiveness over a period of time. Or option D, a procedure performed at year-end to verify that financial statement balances are accurate. Now, if you've never dealt with a walkthrough before or you don't really know what that is, that's okay. We are using these questions in this video to learn what we're supposed to learn about this blueprint topic. So again, if you don't know the answer, that's fine. We're going to go straight to the explanation to start learning. Okay, here we are. The answer is B, a process in which the auditor traces a transaction from initiation through the entity's financial reporting using inquiry, observation, and inspection. So that's the general idea behind a walkthrough, but let's dive into the explanation to learn a little bit more. A walkthrough is an audit procedure where the auditor follows a transaction from its initiation through the entity's entire process, including financial reporting and disclosure. This helps the auditor understand the flow of transactions, assess internal controls, and identify potential risks of material misstatement. Walkthroughs typically involve a combination of inquiry, and that would be asking personnel about the process, observation, which would be watching how the process is performed, and inspection, and that would be reviewing relevant documentation. Unlike tests of controls, which assess the operating effectiveness of controls over a period of time, a walkthrough is primarily focused on understanding the design and implementation of internal controls, because tests of controls is a substantive procedure, and we haven't really talked too much about that yet, but again, a walkthrough is different because you're just trying to understand the design and how they're implementing their controls. You're not necessarily trying to test them for how effective they are, but again, you are trying to see how things work. So that's what the point of a walkthrough is to see how something works from start to finish. Now let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 2. When performing a walkthrough of a significant business process, which of the following best represents the typical sequence of audit procedures? Okay, so let's walk through this. And we kind of already talked about this a little bit in the first question, so hopefully this won't be too difficult. Let's go through the options. Option A, reperformance of controls, to inquiry, to inspection of documentation, to observation. Or option B, inquiry, then observation, then inspection of documentation, then reperformance of controls. Or C, observation, inquiry, reperformance of controls, inspection of documentation. Or option D, inspection of documentation, reperformance of controls, inquiry, and observation. So again, we kind of talked about this in the first question, so if you don't already know the answer, that's okay. Maybe pause the video and think through this and think through what would make sense as far as the course of events when you're doing a walkthrough. And when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are at the answer B, inquiry, to observation, to inspection of documentation, to reperformance of control. So let's walk through this. A walkthrough typically follows a structured approach to understanding the flow of a transaction and the internal controls in place. The usual order is, so this is in order, the typical order. First is inquiry. The auditor begins by asking entity personnel how transactions are initiated, processed, and recorded. This helps the auditor understand the control process and identify key control points. Then there's observation. The auditor observes the process in action to confirm that the described procedures are actually followed. This helps verify whether controls are in place and functioning as intended. And then inspection of documentation comes after that. The auditor reviews relevant documents such as invoices, approvals, and accounting records to confirm that controls are documented and transactions are recorded properly. And then finally, reperformance of controls. In some cases, so this isn't always the case, but in some cases, the auditor may manually reperform certain controls to assess whether they are operating as described. This helps validate the auditor's understanding of the process. Now, again, throughout this, you need to remember this is not substantive testing where they're testing how effective the control is at doing what it's supposed to be doing. They're just testing if it's actually happening, if it's actually happening the way it's described as happening. So there's a difference there. This helps validate the auditor's understanding of the process. Okay, so that's the typical order of events in a walkthrough. And with that, let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 3. Which of the following procedures would not typically be performed as part of a walkthrough? So we've talked a lot about walkthroughs so far, so let's go through this and see if you can figure this out. Option A, observing how a transaction is processed and recorded in the accounting system. B, inspecting supporting documentation such as invoices and approvals to understand control implementation. C, testing the operating effectiveness of controls by selecting a sample of transactions and evaluating whether controls function as intended. And then option D, asking personnel to describe the process for initiating and approving transactions. Okay, so with that, again, we've talked about a lot of this already. If you need to, pause the video, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is C, testing the operating effectiveness of controls by selecting a sample of transactions and evaluating whether controls functioned as intended. Okay, so let's walk through this. A walkthrough is designed to help auditors understand a significant business process and assess whether controls are designed and implemented appropriately. It typically includes inquiry, and that is again asking personnel to describe the process, observation, which is again watching how transactions are processed, and inspection, which is reviewing supporting documents. However, testing the operating effectiveness of controls, and that was option C, which involves selecting a sample of transactions and assessing whether controls consistently functioned as intended over time, is not required as part of walkthrough. This is a separate step that auditors perform when evaluating whether controls can be relied upon. So again, when you're testing how effective the controls are, that is different than what the point of a walkthrough is. The walkthrough is just understanding how things are working, what the process is. You're not necessarily pointing out if they are accomplishing the thing that they're supposed to be accomplishing. You're just looking to see how they're functioning. Now with that, let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 4. Which of the following documentation methods would be most appropriate? Okay, so you might notice there, I read the last part of the sentence first. Now, if you don't know this, this is a really important strategy that you can use for test day. One of the best strategies is to read the last part of the question first. Now, obviously, you won't always be able to do that. Sometimes it's a really short sentence or whatever the case is. But whenever there's like a paragraph or 2 paragraphs, you want to read the last part of the question first because it will give you context for what the rest of the question is talking about most of the time. So imagine on test day, you read this and you immediately know you're dealing with documentation methods and what is most appropriate, so that as you're reading through the rest of this, you're already thinking of different documentation methods like the ones that are listed here, a flowchart, a narrative description. You're starting to think about that right from the beginning instead of reading through the whole paragraph and not really knowing what you're supposed to be doing until you get to the very end. So again, this is a really good test day strategy that you want to get used to doing. Now let's go ahead and dive into the rest of the question. An auditor is performing a walkthrough of a client's revenue cycle and wants to document how sales transactions are processed from order initiation to financial statement reporting. The client's process is highly structured, with multiple approvals and system-generated entries at each stage. The auditor wants a clear visual representation to easily identify key controls and potential risks. So again, which of the following documentation methods would be most appropriate? Now, we haven't talked very much about the different documentation methods. We talked a little bit about it in the previous video, which was kind of like an intro to this video. But again, we don't know what these are. So let's read through these. And if you know the answer, that's great. If not, we'll look at the explanation. But let's read through the options first. Option A, a flowchart. B, a narrative description. C, a data flow diagram. Or D, a checklist. So again, based on what it says here, if you have any idea which one of these would be the most appropriate documentation method. If you don't know though, that's okay. We will look at the answer together right now. Okay, here we are at the answer A, a flowchart. So the best in this scenario would be using a flowchart, but let's walk through this to learn about all of them. Different documentation methods help auditors capture information about business processes in various ways. The best choice depends on the complexity of the process and the level of detail needed. So let's walk through each of them. Flowcharts was the best for this scenario. These provide a visual representation of the process, making it easy to see the sequence of transactions, key controls, and decision points. They are ideal for structured processes with multiple steps, approvals, or system interactions. Now let's talk about narrative descriptions. These are written explanations of a process, often used when the process is simple or when a visual representation is unnecessary. They are useful when documenting procedures for smaller or less complex organizations. Next, there's data flow diagrams. These focus on how data moves between systems, databases, and users, rather than the steps of a transaction process. They are useful for IT-heavy environments where understanding data movement is critical. And then let's talk about checklists. These are primarily used for audit procedures or internal control assessments rather than for documenting transaction flows. Since the client's revenue cycle is highly structured with multiple approval stages, a flowchart is the best option because it visually captures the process flow and highlights key control points effectively. So again, in this case, the flowchart would be the most effective because it has visual representation of all parts of the process, shows different key points. Again, it would be the easiest thing to use when it comes to this documentation. Now let's go to the next question. Okay, here we are at question 5. Why is a flowchart particularly useful in this scenario? So we just talked about flowcharts, so hopefully this one will be not too bad. Let's go up to the top. An auditor is using a flowchart to document a company's inventory purchasing process. The company relies on both manual approvals and automated system entries, and physical documents such as purchase orders and invoices are key parts of the process. So again, why is a flowchart particularly useful in this scenario? Let's walk through the options, and again, be thinking of what we just learned in the previous question. Option A, it provides a high-level summary of the process without detailing individual documents or manual steps. Option B, it allows the auditor to visually represent both the logical flow of transactions and the physical documents involved. C, it replaces the need for inquiry and observation since all process details are included in the diagram. Or D, it is the only method that can be used to document a process involving both manual and automated controls. Okay, so again, based on what we learned in the first question, you probably already know the answer. If not, that's okay. Think through this, pause the video if you need to, and when you're ready, come back. We'll look at the answer together. Okay, here we are. The answer is B. It allows the auditor to visually represent both the logical flow of transactions and the physical documents involved. Okay, so let's walk through this explanation. Flowcharts are useful because they provide a detailed visual representation of a process, and we pretty much already talked about this, showing both the logical sequence of transactions and the physical aspects such as documents, approvals, and manual handoffs. In the case of an inventory purchasing process, a flowchart can illustrate the following. So let's go through each of them. How purchase orders and invoices move through the approval process, where manual approvals occur versus system-generated entries, and the connection between physical documents and electronic records. Now let's go through the other incorrect answers. A, flowcharts provide a detailed breakdown of the process, including documents and approvals, rather than just a high-level summary. C was incorrect because inquiry and observation are still necessary to understand the process before documenting it into a flowchart. And then D was incorrect because while flowcharts are particularly effective for mixed manual and automated processes, other documentation methods such as narratives can also be used depending on the situation. So they're not the only thing that can be used in all situations. Because flowcharts combine logical transaction flow with physical elements, they are especially useful for auditing processes involving both manual and automated controls. And with that, we've learned quite a bit about walkthroughs and about some of the different documentation methods, especially flowcharts. Now, before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperFast CPA process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up. You've seen 2, 3, 4 questions trying to teach you about flowcharts or whatever the case may be. Again, these are the things that are showing up more in the questions than other things. And you take a moment and you write these out as pillar topics in your own words. And as you're doing this each day, you are building your own personal repository of the most important things you need to know for the exam in your own words. So let's go ahead and look at the pillar topics for this video. Okay, here we are at the pillar topics. Let's just dive straight in. Purpose and process of a walkthrough, that's what we're talking about first. A walkthrough is an audit procedure where the auditor traces a transaction from initiation to financial reporting using inquiry, observation, and inspection. It helps the auditor understand control design and implementation, but is not meant to test control effectiveness over time. Now let's go through the typical steps in a walkthrough. Walkthroughs generally follow a structured sequence, and we just kind of mentioned it. Inquiry, which is asking personnel about the processes, then observation, which is watching how transactions are processed, and then inspection of documentation, which is reviewing supporting records. And sometimes there's reperformance, which is manually executing controls to validate understanding, to make sure that you're understanding how they just worked. Now let's talk about walkthrough versus tests of controls. Again, there's a difference there. A walkthrough assesses design and implementation of controls, while a test of controls evaluates whether those controls operate effectively over time. A walkthrough does not require selecting a sample of transactions for control testing. Again, this is not a substantive procedure, or at least you don't have to do a substantive procedure during the walkthrough. You're just trying to make sure you understand how they're designed and implemented. Now let's walk through the documentation methods in audits. Auditors document business processes using different tools. Flowcharts, which are visual representations of steps and controls. Narratives, which are written descriptions for simpler processes. And data flow diagrams, which show how data moves between systems. And checklists, which are used for control assessments, not process flow. So again, checklists isn't necessarily something that is as common or as useful as these other ones, but it is something you use in an audit. But the main ones you want to focus on there are the flowcharts, the narratives, and the data flow diagrams. Now let's go through the last pillar topic, strengths and limitations of flowcharts. We talked a lot about flowcharts. Flowcharts effectively illustrate process flow, decision points, and physical documents, making them ideal for structured processes with multiple controls. However, they do not capture reasoning behind decisions, which may require additional narratives or inquiry. So they're not going to capture everything, but they do capture with visuals the flow of things and different points of the process. Now with that, we've gone over the pillar topics for this video, and that is the end of the YouTube version of the video. Remember, we only went over 5 questions in today's video, but Superfast CPA Pro members will get access to the full 10-question video when we post it in the members forum. So they get a little bit more practice and a little bit more understanding. So if you like this, make sure you check out becoming a pro member of SuperfastCPA. And the easiest way to do that is by first actually going to SuperfastCPA.com and signing up for our free 1-hour webinar training. In that 1 hour, we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam. And again, we will save you so much time struggling with the process. So make sure you check that out. And that will be the easiest path to you learning about and becoming a pro member of SuperfastCPA. Now with all that, I hope this video was helpful. If you did like it, make sure to like it and leave a comment, and I will see you in the next video.